Hello everybody. What we've got here on the bench is another T90, and if you need to see the rebuild of a T90, I've got a video out there. We're doing a short section on the side shifter here, and a few guys have asked the questions about replacing seals and why they're having trouble with the shifter popping out of gear and things like that. And I already have this one apart, but I want to show you guys how to get it apart. There's your little shifter, what it looks like. This is first and reverse, and that'll go back in there. See if I can get it in there to show you. Okay, so that's what you'd be staring at. And here's the old seal. The old seal would be in there, and you'll be staring at that. And if you need to change your seals because they're leaking, they're very hard to replace from the outside. You know, just you'd have to drill or chisel and get an edge started and then pop it out of there. They can be a nuisance. So when I'm doing a rebuild, I like to pull everything out and get some other pieces out here. This is your little shuttle in here that goes between the two. It's got a spring in there, and then there's two little detent balls that go on each side of it. And a lot of guys that can't keep their shifter, you know, to stay in gear, the shifter's always popping out of gear and stuff. Other than worn gears and stuff, this little spring is a real problem sometimes. And you can't ever see it because it's inside that little tube there, and that's inside the transmission. Well, when that spring goes bad, you have no pressure on the little detent balls, and your shifter is just floppy. So for just a tiny spring, it can cause you a lot of grief. So I like to take everything apart and check that out. And this spring is good. The shuttle's nice and smooth and everything. But the problem a lot of guys have been asking me is, how do you get these out? And there's a pin in there that goes down through the top here like this. And what that does is it catches in that groove. So that'll don't just wail on those with a hammer, you'll have some trouble. Now these pins, I think I can get you in there and show you the pins. We got 153 on that side. I got 136 on that side. I don't know if you can see that with the glare. But it's a tapered pin. So make sure you don't drive it in and tighten it. So they always go in from the top. Small end goes down. And they'll go through there. So you flip your case over. And you try and tap these guys out. And that's what will get these guys to release. Let me get that one out of there. Okay, now sometimes those can be a bear, and you know, like I say, you're going to tap it, and you can't get a real big punch in there because it's a small pin. So on this particular one, and this is basically the first one I've ever had to do because these were so tight, I had to put a little bit of heat on these and expand the case a little bit, and it still took a lot to drive these out. But there's no way you're going to get those those shifters out without taking these pins out. So, you know, a lot of times they're peened over real flat. You don't even know what's in there. These have to come out first before you can get those out. So you get those driven out. You clean up the bore real nice. And I think I got some new seals here. And then you just tap your seal in. I like to put the seal in and then carefully put the shaft through there. It's just easier to bang them in square. And get your new seal in there. And then get your detent balls and everything lined up and get them in there, and you'll have no trouble. If your spring is good, The detents will be nice and crisp, and you won't be you won't be having your shifter, flop out of gear. So it's just something specific to a T90 with the column shift. It's they only use them for a short while, but for you guys that do have them, that's how you get the the shifters out, and that's how you replace your seals real easily. And like I say, always check that spring, because that can give you a lot of trouble. But as I put this one together, I'll show you a few more things that are specific to an early T90. And we'll flip the case around a little bit. And you remember on these early ones, you don't have circulation between the transmission oil and your transfer case oil. So I'll show you the bearing we use to keep the lube in the transmission. You got to treat them like two separate things. The transmission has to be filled and maintained, and the transfer case has to be filled and maintained. If fluid is getting from one to the other, it's just going to cause a overfill in one and underfill in another, and you don't want that. So as I get a little further along, I'll show you I'll show you the difference between the back of the case here on an early one, and same thing with the transfer case. And I'll try and show you a later one where you could see how the fluid was circulating through the two of them. But that's a little bit further down. Let me get some gears in here. Let me get some seals in, get everything ready to go, and then when I get ready to do the put the two of them together, I'll show you some more details. So hang in there. I'll be right back with you. Okay, everybody, we're back finishing up that T90 rebuild. This is the early column shift, and you can see we've got the seals in there now, and we've got all our gears in there. And you'll notice in the back we have a sealed bearing in the back. We've got one in the front, as we normally do on T90s, and we take the inner seal out so it can still get lube, and we leave the outer seal in there so it won't leak out. And same thing with the back one. The inner seal is gone, but the outer one's still there. And you can see the shift arms are in there. And if you guys get mixed up when you take those out, that back one there that does first and reverse, that's got to be facing forward. I've seen a lot of guys put these together and they put that in backwards, and you're stuck in your gear is stuck in there. You got no neutral and stuff. You're always in reverse. So make sure you put that one. You see this guy in here, right in there. Make sure that's facing forward when you do an early one. And that's a look at the back there. Now remember, we're talking, you don't get circulation between the transmission and transfer case on these early ones. So that's what the back of that looks like. You have no extra holes where it's going to leak lube out or anything like that. You get one over here. That's a regular T90. And you can see we have an extra hole right here, one here, and one up there. And that's meant to circulate and flow fluid from transmission to transfer case. Now on the early ones, that's why we use that sealed bearing. We don't want the fluid going and circulating or accidentally getting in the transfer case, or transfer case lube getting in the transmission. That'll just lead to an overfill or underfill situation. So when you're putting this together, just be conscious of what's going on. Make sure you know if you got an early one, there's a different gasket for the early one, and if you've got a later one, obviously you want your transfer case to be later, so the fluid does flow. You want your lube at one constant height between the transmission and the transfer case. And like I say, use a sealed bearing in the back, and I'll show you the original one. I'll take the original one back out, and I'll show you what that one looks like. Okay, here, there's the original bearing I took out of that column shift transmission. It's kind of banged up because I had to bang it out of the transfer case, but it has it's open on the inside, has a shield on the other side so it won't leak lube out. So that's the original, and we replaced it with that modern one with a nice rubber seal there. I'll try and get you in on that transfer case. You see that transfer case doesn't have any extra holes for the lube to get through, so you fill that separate, you fill the transmission separate, and you keep it that way. This is a gasket for a transfer case, and you can see they leave allowance for your holes over here and a little one over there, and that allows the lube to seek one constant height. And this is the one that we're going to use with the column shift T90. Doesn't have any extra holes in it or anything. And I'll show you what that looks like. There it is there. So when you get your gasket kit, you'll have usually 3 gaskets in there. And if you're doing an early one, make sure you use that gasket. Try and get you in here. That gasket, you see how it allows the holes to be open? Right in that area. Right in that area. And one up there. So just make sure you use the right gasket with it. And like I say, most of the early transfer cases are going to have that 3/4 intermediate shaft and no provision for lube. And then later on, when you get it to 1 1/8 and 1 1/4, you know, by then they were always the lubrication was always flowing between the two. And when you have an early transfer case, you'll notice these couple holes up here, and it might look a little odd, you know, because there's nothing coming out of the transmission into the transfer case in that area. But let me show you what those are for, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, before the T90, there's a T84 case right there, and that was in the military vehicles. But they use the same transfer case. And you'll see you've got your shift rods here. There's the back of the case. And they need a place to go when you're shifting. You know, in the front, in the front you got a little cap there to keep the oil from coming out. But you need something. Hang in there. You need something, a place for those to go in the transfer case when you're shifting. Try and get that lined up and hold on to everything. Okay, now you can see those are, I think you can see it, you can see those are lined up with the holes there in your transfer case. And when you cover that up, when you're shifting, you'll have a place for those to go. No big deal when you're on a CJ stuff, because obviously there's no shift rods like that. But a lot of guys wonder what those are for, and I just thought I'd clear up that question. It's for the shift rods on a T84. And like I say, those are only on the early transfer cases. And we've just about finished up with this one. I've got a little safety wire there. We've got a safety wire, a few more holes. Put the shift rods in, and then we'll attach the transmission to the transfer case. And we've got that Spicer 18. That's a center PTO. I think this one might be running a sickle bar or something like that. But we rebuilt that. That'll go on. Put the whole thing together, get it painted up, and get it on the way. But just a few tips for you guys rebuilding the early ones. I do get a lot of questions on those, and the basic rebuild is the same as the T90, and you can run back and catch my T90 rebuild if you need any information on that. The only thing, like I say, those pins that hold the shifter in there, those can be a bear sometimes, but you take your time and work at it and you'll get it alright. And fill your transmission, fill your transfer case, make sure the level's perfect, and you should be good to go for a long time. And if you guys are wondering, I do have the correct lube for these transmissions and transfer cases. No extreme pressure additives in there. They won't harm your thrust washers or your blocking rings. A lot of guys have been using it and enjoying it, but just putting it out there again, if anybody needs the correct lubrication for these old transmissions and transfer cases, I do have the stuff, and it'll work in anything, any kind of old truck, vintage car, anything like that. I've got the correct lube for the transmissions, transfer cases, steering boxes. I've got the front knuckle lube, and just want to let you guys know so you put the right stuff in there and you don't undo all your hard work by putting the wrong lube in there. Well, just kind of a quick one.